Good morning, friends. Let me at the outset wish you all a very happy new year and to state that it's a great privilege to stand before you this morning as the T20 chair for India's G20 presidency. I also want to congratulate the Indonesian team for cooperating with us and for a very successful handover ceremony that we had quite recently. It's a privilege for me to welcome this morning Sri Amitabh Kant, the Sherpa of G20 India, and in a short while he will deliver to you the all-important inaugural address, which will no doubt benefit all of us as we plan our work ahead. India took over the presidency of the G20 on 1 December 2022, and our engagement group, dare I say, the T20, has got off to a very blistering start. And we have a dynamic website, and our social media presence and outreach is considerable, thanks to the use of new platforms such as Telegram and Instagram. By the way, they are new for me, given the fact that I belong to a slightly older generation. Under the T20, we have the privilege of 115 institutions participating from across all the G20 countries. And our aim is to ensure representation from all the guest countries as well as the G20 countries. As an ideas bank, we want it to be an inclusive process. We have cast our net wide around the world. But we must also maintain a semblance of balance between inclusivity and agility, as some have put it. We are honored to have so many of you join us in person, despite the short notice that you were given. And we feel that we already know many of you since we have seen you in our online interactions already. The good start that we've had would not have been possible without the unstinted support that we have received from the G20 Secretariat led by the Sherpa himself. And equally, the good start is thanks to the commitment and dedication of the experts who are physically present here, those that have joined us online, and whose constant feedback has enabled us to make several improvements early on in the year. Over the past few weeks, T20 India has given special attention to cross-pollination of ideas across the 7 task forces, and this conference will allow further opportunities to task force members to interact with one another and to create new synergies and contact points. Friends, India's G20 presidency takes place against the backdrop of fragile geopolitics. The world appears truly bruised by the fallout of the COVID-19 pandemic. Economic recovery is a priority around the world. The trade and technology wars and the conflict in Ukraine have only made matters worse. Amidst this, we see India as a resilient economy with the highest growth rate among the large economies. It is cliched to state that multilateral institutions have failed us in recent years, whether the UN or global financial lending institutions. And without some kind of reform, the deadlock among major powers will prevent progress. We must ask ourselves the question if there are alternatives that can deliver, whether in economic recovery, healthcare, inclusive digital economy, or sustainable development. The restructuring of the post-pandemic economies requires resilient supply chains and adequate financial outlays to deal with multiple challenges, including climate change. The G20 had to carve out a new vision and framework for itself in the aftermath of the global financial and economic crises of 2008. And we are once again on the cusp of a major point of inflection. And I do hope that we can do so again. It is today very clear that G20 is one of the world's largest and most influential groupings that brings together the top economies of the world. It includes the G7 industrialized nations as well as the emerging economies of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. In that sense, it is also symbolic of India's philosophy of Vasudhaiva Kutumbakam, that the entire world is one family. For the first time in the history of the G20, 4 consecutive presidencies will be held by developing countries, and we hope to work closely with the past, present, and future troikas. India's presidency is indeed a moment for the global south, and yet it is clear that the G20 must not presume to speak for all those who are outside the grouping. At the same time, it must do its utmost to be empathetic towards those that are not necessarily in this grouping. It must, in that sense, be inclusive and all-encompassing in nature, and that is what we are trying to do through our outreach to those who are not members of the G20. Even as we meet today, the Prime Minister's office and the Foreign Office have been hosting the Voices of the Global South conference to take views from all over the world. The North and the South, therefore, must forge new partnerships together. Just this morning, we've also had a T20, T7 side event, if I'm not wrong, and it is only the first of many such engagements that we hope to have with partners around the world. Even within India, we are casting our net wide, as you know, to involve experts and institutions from all over the country. It augurs well that the current chair of the G7 is Japan, a country that I love, a place where I served as ambassador not too long ago. It's an exceptional nation that stands for peace and progress alongside India in envisioning a very bright and multipolar future for Asia. The G20 may not be in a position to offer panacea for all the ills and all the difficulties and challenges that are before us, but it can provide a healing touch. We want the T20 this year to adopt a blue skies policy, an approach that enables everyone to offer ideas for the future rather than going for the most common denominator, which is not always necessarily very helpful. We wish to avoid anodyne suggestions and common denominators. And that is why we have requested each of the co-chairs of our task forces to provide 3 big ideas or recommendations. We've also invited the public at large to do this through an innovative ideas Dropbox on the T20 website. Friends, the world today needs a values-based approach, an ethics-based approach to meet its challenges, and we should all come together to forge a new path. And this is one of the themes specifically addressed by Task Force 3, especially in the context of life, that's lifestyle for environment, resilience and values for well-being. This is also, incidentally, a theme proposed by the Prime Minister of India, Shri Narendra Modi, at COP26. Prime Minister Modi has also encouraged the nation to work tirelessly for gender equality. And in our task forces, the T20 task forces, we have left no stone unturned to ensure such gender balance. We are also keen to work closely with the Women 20 engagement group, as well as other engagement groups, and several of our esteemed colleagues from other engagement groups are present here this morning. I want to acknowledge specifically the presence of Ambassador Vijay Nambiar, who represents, as you know, as principal coordinator, the C20. Over the next 2 days, along with the plenary sessions, we will also have task force sessions where smaller groups can deliberate on a blueprint for our work ahead. And we also want you to experience India's rich culture and traditions. Incidentally, we must credit Mr. Amitabh Kant not only for that fantastic, incredible India program, but he's also played a very key role in making India very credible. We hope that all of you will return for the Global Town Hall on the 5th of March, the mid-year meeting, as well as for the final summit in Mysuru. Thank you very much. That's all from me for now. Thank you.
With that, let me now invite our inaugural speaker, Mr. Amitabh Kant, to deliver the address to all of us. Mr. Amitabh Kant, of course, is the G20 Sherpa, but he's also someone who has steered various important tasks for the government of India and for states in India in his long career. As a bureaucrat, he has been recognized as someone who has worked in the most important development sectors with some of in one of the most challenging economic environments, created programs that have lifted millions out of poverty, and has served in innovative ways to connect India's future with the opportunities that reside. Of course, besides being the top bureaucrat that he was, I have always argued, has been one of India's best brand managers. Incredible India, God's Own Country, Kerala, and many campaigns by ITDC were introduced by him, shaped by him, designed by him. We are all lucky and privileged that he's going to be leading the presidency by being Sherpa over the next 11 months. And of course, his support for all of us at T20 is invaluable. With that, let me turn to Mr. Amitabh Kant to speak to us this morning. Over to you, sir.
Mr. Chinoy, Samir, Mr. Jayant Sinha, Mr. Rohan, Jaitley, many distinguished guests who've joined us today, participants from all across the world, because this is being streamed live across the world. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted to be here at the launch of T20. At the outset, let me first compliment Mr. Chinoy, Rohan, Samir, Sachin, this whole team of T20 for being a very lively, very vibrant, and a very dynamic T20 group. They are ones who've really stimulated a lot of intellectual debate and discussion around a vast range of G20 priorities. They've also extended their hand to other engagement groups. And I think they've really been a role model group. So compliments to them. Ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting at a point of time when the world is passing through multiple crises. The world is economic growth has very sharply slowed down. As the IMF chief has said, that 1/3 of the world is under recession already. The post-COVID impact has led to 200 million people going below the poverty line. You've had about 100 million people losing their jobs. There is a huge geopolitical challenge. Europe is reeling under high energy prices. There's a crisis of fuel, food, and fertilizer. There's a challenge of climate action and climate finance. And more than anything else, I think there's a huge challenge of enabling support to over about 75 countries of the world which are suffering from a global debt crisis. But as we face many of these challenges, let me also say that every challenge is an opportunity. And G20, in its long history, actually has been a major driver of several radical reforms, from recapitalization of IMF to Basel III norms to providing impetus to growth post-2008 economic crisis. G20 has actually led the global economy in many ways in the past. And therefore, to my mind, when India takes over this G20 presidency in a moment of crisis, this is also a major opportunity for India to really work with both developed and emerging countries to drive many of these challenges towards a very accelerated pace of growth and development. So, ladies and gentlemen, to my mind, one of the key challenges for the world today is to bring in inclusive, resilient, and sustainable growth, which is one of India's key priority. Because the world has to accelerate the pace of growth, and without the pace of growth, it will not be possible to lift a vast segment of the population above poverty line. And if 200 million people have gone below poverty line, it's necessary that we do this sustained growth over a very long period of time. And therefore, the economic agenda of growth will be very critical for G20. Secondly, we are in the midst of a huge, huge crisis of climate action. There is a challenge of decarbonizing the world. Most of the emerging markets are not responsible for it. But the challenge is that many of the countries which have to industrialize will become major polluters of the world for tomorrow. Entire carbonization has been done by the developed world. And they are committed to providing, in the name of climate justice, to providing about $100 billion per year to the developed countries in 2009 at Copenhagen, which has not been lived up to. But irrespective of that, it's important that we are able to drive the world towards decarbonization. It's necessary for all of us to survive. And therefore, the challenge is that how do we do climate action but ensure that there's adequate flow of climate finance from the developed world, to which it had earlier committed to. But more than the public finance, how do you ensure? It's not that the world is short of finance. There are vast sums of funds available. How are you able to do credit enhancement? How do you do first loss guarantees? How do you do blended finance to ensure a vast amount of private pools of resources available to flow to developing countries and to entrepreneurs in developing countries? Take the example of India, which is actually, if you look at the total carbon space available at 1.5 degrees centigrade, India is just responsible for about 1.5, 1.6% of it, whereas logically on a per capita income basis, it is entitled to about 17% for it. But in due course, as it industrializes, it's very important that it becomes the first country in the world to industrialize without carbonizing the world. And therefore, the challenge is that Indian entrepreneurs who are top class, who've enabled India to achieve its NDC targets 9 years ahead of schedule, are able to drive renewables into green hydrogen, decarbonize refineries, steel, fertilizer, long-distance transport. And this would require you to do a lot of long-term lending, hedging instruments, blended finance. And this would require a huge amount of restructuring of multilateral finance institutions, because these institutions were all designed for a post-World War II, post-Bretton Woods period, but are not designed to support for SDGs and for climate finance. And therefore, that's a very, very major challenge before the world today. And if you were able to do that within the existing parameters and the existing statutes itself, you will be able to do 15x more lending to the world. And therefore, reforms of multilateral institutions and designing them as institutions for the 21st century is a critical task before the world. The third key challenge to my mind is that as the world advances in SDG goals, we are midway through the 2030 goal of SDGs, but instead of progressing, we have regressed. And therefore, if you want to accelerate the pace of transformation to the lives of citizens across the world, particularly in enhancing nutrition, improving learning outcomes, improving health outcomes, a vast amount of resources need to flow for SDG goals. And that will be a very major challenge before the world. That how do you transform the lives of citizens living in the global south, which the Prime Minister yesterday talked about. And therefore, the challenge before the world will be critical. I'm talking about this because G20 today represents about almost 85% of the global GDP. It represents almost 78% of the global trade. It represents almost 90% of the patent. All the innovation is all happening from here. And that leads me to the next key point, and that is that it will not be possible to accelerate the pace of this growth and this transformation without technological transformation and digital transformation. India has demonstrated this, and a recent study by Bank of International Settlement has shown that what India has achieved through technological transformation in the last 7 years actually would have taken 50 years to achieve. So what we've done in 7 years actually would have taken 50 years to achieve, because India built an alternative model to the big tech model of the USA, or the European model of technology because we built the railway tracks on which we allowed private sector to innovate and compete. And therefore, we were able to provide a digital identity to everyone, link the digital identity to the bank accounts of everyone, and then use fast payments. And today, India does 11x payments of what America and Europe do. We do 3x payments of what China does. And we were able to do, we've done about 2.5 billion COVID vaccination, all paperless and cashless. And that is the real big technological leapfrogging which India has done through establishing a vast range of digital public infrastructure. And that's a unique model which India has built up. The challenge today is that in the world, there are 4 billion people who do not have a digital identity. There are 2 billion people without a bank account. There are 133 countries which do not have a fast payment mechanism. Can the model and the innovation of India become the model for the rest of the world? And to my mind, this is the great India narrative to the G20 presidency of India, which really can spearhead technological transformation in a very, very fast and aggressive manner across the world. Because without technological transformation, it will not be possible to rapidly enhance learning outcomes and health outcomes. The other big India narrative really to the G20 presidency of India is what India has done to its health. It's been the pharmacy of the world. It's been the vaccine capital of the world. It has provided vaccination supplies to over 75 countries. It has been able to insure 500 million people on health insurance, which is 1.5 times the population of entire Europe. And it has converged Ayurveda and yoga with its advanced medicine. So it's a unique model which has had a huge impact on the population here and was enabled India to survive this this entire period of COVID. And we were able to use the digital transformation to ensure that almost 460 million people could get money straight into their bank account without any leakages. And therefore, this is again a great India narrative. The other key point, which the Prime Minister has talked about at length, is the initiative of women-led development during India's presidency. Because today, almost 47% of the population in the world are women. In India, the latest NFHS data shows that there are 1,074 women to 1,000 men. There are more women than men in India. India can't grow at sustained pace of 9 to 10% per annum year after year for 3 decades or more to be able to lift its very young population hugely above the poverty line without women. It's not possible to drive the world today without women's taking care of women's nutrition, taking care of the pregnant women, because there's a virtuous cycle of malnutrition without improving learning outcomes, without health outcomes, without financial inclusion. And therefore, in India, when we started the Pradhan Mantri Jan Dhan Yojana, there were just 19% women with a bank account. The latest data, 56% of the bank accounts are owned by women. This has been the transformation which India has done. 19 to 56% in the last 5 to 6 years. When we were opening bank accounts from 2015 to 2018, 55% of the bank accounts opened across the world were opened in India. Every second bank account opened across the world was opened in India. And that has led to this transformation. 23 crore women have got a bank account. Look at Mudra loans, 55% of the accounts have flowed to women. So without putting women into leadership position, without there being the change leader, it will not be able to transform the world. Our thinking is absolutely clear that this has to be one of the key agendas of the world. And therefore, the Prime Minister's vision is that driving many of these reforms would require a huge intellectual input. There's no other body, let me tell you, there's no other working group in the government. There is no other engagement group which has been constituted, which is better equipped to mold the G20 based on India's priority than T20. There is no other group in the entire functioning of G20 which has the ability to take G20 towards what the Prime Minister has envisioned as action-oriented, decisive, inclusive, and ambitious. And therefore, to my mind, the real brain trust and the real brain of G20 is the T20. The shaping of how India does in G20, how it unfolds the G20 in the coming years, and how India's G20 presidency is shaped will be determined by the T20 and its intellectual inputs. And therefore, there's a very onerous responsibility on Mr. Chinoy, Mr. Samir Saran, Mr. Rohan Jaitley, and its distinguished, and Sujan, who's here, all of you, there's a very huge responsibility to give us the best professional inputs which will enable us to work with all the countries, both the G20 members and the invitee countries. And your inputs really are critical to the functioning of G20. So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm truly delighted that this G20 has taken off in a big way from the number of meetings we've had. We are working in partnership with all the states. All the states have played a very key role in this. Our objective is that we take G20 to every single state and union territory as the Prime Minister has desired. Every state is a partner. We're taking G20 to the people of India, making them aware of all the issues. We are doing a huge outreach of youth, of women, of intellectuals, everyone across. It's not just about G20, it's about creating a mass momentum and about Jan Bhagidari. It's about taking G20 to every single individual's awareness of the critical issues confronting the world today. And therefore, T20, along with its many other engagement groups, will play a critical role. I'm delighted that Mr. Nambiar is present here, who's driving Civil 20. There are many other groups, Youth 20, Women 20, many others. And I'm truly delighted that T20 is actually working in partnership with many of these groups. So I wish T20 all the best. I wish it all success, and I look forward to constantly participating in its many interactions, its many discussions, and we'll constantly look forward to falling back on all your intellectual inputs to make India's presidency, as the Prime Minister said, very decisive, inclusive, action-oriented, and very, very forward-looking. Thank you very much, Mr. Chinoy. Thank you very much, Samir. I wish you all the very best.
Thank you, Mr. Sherpa. Now let me invite core group member Rohan Jaitley to propose a vote of thanks, and after which I will request Ambassador Chinoy, Rohan, Mr. Kant, Ms. Vijay Thakur Singh, and of course the Executive Director of the Secretariat, Sunena, to light the lamp as we conclude the inaugural session. But Rohan, first to you.
I would like to begin by thanking the Sherpa, Mr. Kant, for taking the time out and addressing the gathering despite his busy schedule. It is helpful for the T20 to get a perspective of the Sherpa track as we launch into the formal discussions and start ideating and integrating our research into an actionable policy recommendation. I want to thank the international and the national delegates who have gathered here today. It is a testament that the larger G20 community's faith in grouping and acknowledgement of the important work we are doing here. I would like to thank the members of the Secretariat who have been working tirelessly over the last few weeks to make this event possible and bringing us together. Let me close by thanking the chairs, the co-chairs, the partners, both in the room and who are joining us virtually. Thank you for committing your support to the Indian G20 presidency and its objectives by contributing to the process of your knowledge, expertise, and wisdom. These 2 days of deliberations are just the start of an intense 8 months to follow. We are grateful to all for committing yourselves in the process. Each contribution is unique and valued by us. T20 India has made a conscious effort to make the process representative. Adequate representation from all nations and through the process. Over the course of the next few months, we hope to have built new friendships, new bridges of creativity. We have added new voices in the hope that more diverse opinions will get reflected in the process of the G20. The grouping, which often becomes a privileged club, must be able to respond to the needs of the larger community. With 3 consecutive developing country presidencies upon us, we are duty-bound to ensure that the need of the many get a fair hearing, unencumbered, undistracted specific experiences. While specific experiences may shape our views of the world, our main aim is to find which experiences are scalable for the good of the larger community at large. This imperative to create policies with a wide group of takers should be at the center of our conversations. As we go through the next few months of discussions, dialogue, we look forward for your active participation and learning and growing with you during the year and beyond. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. We will close the session by lighting the ceremonial lamp. Can I invite Mr. Amitabh Kant, Ambassador Vijay Thakur Singh, Ambassador Chinoy. Of course, Sunena and Rohan are already here. Sunena, come. Sunena, come. Sunena, take the candle. Light one.